Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. I'm Josh Raulerson. This is kind of a late night for me, so I appreciate the opportunity to stay up late on a school night. If I start to fade or get a little fuzzy later, that's what's going on. It's my great pleasure to have worked with David on this project. He came to us in last fall with this idea. I would say about 90% formed and ready to go. He made it very easy for us to say, yes, this sounds like a collaboration we'd like to be part of. And when you listen to the podcast, as I hope you will, know that you are hearing the fruits of David's labors to a very large extent. We just put the pieces together and tried to make it sound good, but this is very much David's creation, and we're very proud to have been part of it, to have played a role. So I guess it falls to me to introduce a man who really needs no introduction here, certainly at Pitt Law, and anyone who listens to WESA also knows his name and his voice. He's a frequent contributor on Essential Pittsburgh and on our newscasts, so we go back a little bit.
We do.
But David Harris, of course, distinguished faculty scholar at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. He teaches criminal law, criminal procedure, evidence. He is the leading national authority on racial profiling. As I'm sure you all know, he's been interviewed by countless national news sources. You've read him in the New York Times, the Washington Post. You've heard him on NPR, not just local NPR, but you've heard him coast to coast on All Things Considered and Morning Edition. He's been on PBS, all the network news shows. This is a nationally recognized expert on this topic. One of the reasons we were so excited to take this on. He's the author of, among other works, Profiles in Injustice, Why Racial Profiling Cannot Work, Good Cops, The Case for Preventive Policing, Failed Evidence, Why Law Enforcement Resists Science, and more. And without any further ado, I'd like to say, David Harris, thank you for letting us all be a part of this.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. And it falls to me to introduce you to a familiar voice. Wasn't it funny to hear his voice every morning, and now here he is? I cannot stress to you enough how grateful I am for Josh and Megan, who believed in the idea when I brought it to them. A lot of times you have an idea, a good idea even, and if you don't have somebody on the other end of that who will take you up on it and bring you forward and help you understand what you need to do to take it forward, you don't really have anything. So I was very, very lucky that Josh agreed to have a meeting with me and that he was receptive, and Megan and Josh have really taken it all and run. Just let me tell you a couple of things about Josh. This is not his first public radio rodeo here in Pittsburgh. He has been the news director and the morning news anchor at Aspen Public Radio. He is an Iowa native, and he has served in similar roles, hosting All Things Considered and Weekend Edition on Iowa Public Radio, and also WOI in Ames, Iowa. And Dr. Raulerson is the author of Singularities, Technoculture, Transhumanism, and Science Fiction in the 21st Century, published by Liverpool University Press. So it was a privilege, it still is a privilege, to work with somebody who knows his way around a microphone and understands the world in some very interesting ways. And I'm so grateful that you and Megan decided to grab this and move it forward. It's also important for me to say that nothing like this happens just with one person, all right? There's always a team of people. So Josh, Megan, Elizabeth Baisley, who is also here, she's the marketing director for WESA, and then there's a whole team of people who have assisted in putting together tonight's event and helping me to get the word out about the podcast, because you can make a good product, but if nobody ever listens, what's the point of that? Well, I would still do it just for fun, I guess. But I do want to tell you about the people who have helped so much here. First, Kim Getz, back by the camera, Chris over there in the corner, but then lots of other people. Corey Begg and Jantosh Gerling, who's back there in the corner, have helped so much with social media and other things. Christina Daub. Christina, where are you? You must be here somewhere. Anthony Moore, who has just walked in from the university. There you are. And Sarah Barca, who helped to arrange the event tonight. I'm thankful for the help that all of these people gave to me to get this event and to get the podcast up. And it's live. We're up now. And Josh told me as of this morning when he started his shift, which I don't know if you know this, is 5 a.m. So he really was serious when he said, this is up late for me. There are already some downloads. So we're in business. We're in business. So welcome, everybody. So glad you're here.
David, when you came to us last fall and with this idea and with the pitch for a show, it was clear to me right away that you're, first of all, a podcast listener, a podcast fan, someone who's pretty intimate with the format and pretty savvy about its potential, its impact. But for those of us who weren't in that room, why podcasting for you? Why this medium? Why this approach? And where does it connect with what you do as a scholar and a teacher?
Well, podcasting is, I think, the next logical extension for audio. As a person who's been a public radio listener, really an addict for I don't know how long, and I bet there are some other people in here who'd raise their hands to that, I've become used to and take for granted, I hope not too much for granted, I do donate, like all of you should, the presence of quality audio in my life to inform me and to bring me interesting stories all the time. And podcasting is an ideal way to keep going with that. It democratizes the idea you don't have to own a whole radio station. You can be a guy with a microphone and a computer in a basement somewhere. That wouldn't be maybe that interesting, but there you have it. I just think it's an ideal way to tell stories and to discuss issues. You don't have to fit within a format of a particular amount of time or to conform to any particular sort of format. It is a great way to do it. And let's face it, we are increasingly in a sort of a Netflix world. Everybody wants things on demand. And because of that, podcasting becomes the sort of ideal way to come across with audio, whether it's entertainment or news or discussion, in a way that you simply can't always fit into other formats. A lot of you are probably familiar with the Serial podcast. How many Serial listeners do we have here? Oh, a few. Okay, I'm certainly one of them. Well, there was podcasting before Serial. Okay, newsflash, right? This podcasting's been around for a long time, but Serial, this 12-episode spin-off of This American Life, is an incredible adventure, if you want to call it that, or journey through one case through the entire criminal justice system. And did this not attract 8 million listeners, something like that? And to me, that changed how we think of podcasting. It made it much more of a thing that lots of people do. It made it obvious that this makes up a good piece of the future of audio, whether it's news or entertainment. I've been listening to podcasts, not just Serial, for a while. The variety is incredible. And I just thought, after the last 18 or 20 months, right, you have incredible, intense discussion of issues in the criminal justice system, things that I've been working on for 2 decades, whether it's how race plays into the system, or whether, how is it that the federal government comes in to fix a police department, where do they get the authority for that? Whatever it is, there is a real thirst, a real hunger for good information about that. And I thought, I don't know anybody who's doing that. And I would like to be the one to fill that gap. Mm-hmm. And so podcasting seemed like the thing to do.
And I can say that when you came to us with this idea, it was at a moment when we had been talking about how to better deploy podcasting and how to make it part of what we do at a programming level. And also happened to be at a moment, an 18 to 20 month long moment now in American history, where these subjects are very much at the forefront of the conversation. So it was clear to us right away that there would be interest in this. And you mentioned Netflix, and certainly Making a Murderer is on everyone's lips, yep. and Serial, of course. What is it? Tell us about your approach to the format and the content of this show that finds its own niche within that selection of media choices on this topic.
Well, to me, I wasn't interested in being another loud sort of cable TV voice. I thought that the way that I would like to have things explained to me, the way that I would learn best, would fit very well in the podcasting format, is to frame an issue and then to get somebody who's really, really interesting and involved in that issue, the best person out there, and to get that person talking. Because one thing I always observe on whether it's a podcast I like or on a public radio program is when you get somebody who really knows their business, who understands things in a very deep way, and the interviewer asks the right question and gets out of the way. That's sort of a magic thing to me. And I thought, why not try that? That seemed to be the way to go. I wasn't sure, you come up with an idea like this, I wasn't sure if anybody would agree to come on. I mean, I knew a lot of people. I'd been in this area of law or anything, but who comes on a podcast that doesn't exist yet, right? Hey, be on my podcast. Oh, really? But I had I worried too much, I guess, because these people were very willing to come on, knowing that they would get an open opportunity to express their views in an intelligent sort of conversation. So what I wanted people to hear was not a lecture, not a class, nothing like that, not a seminar. I wanted them to hear a conversation that, like you and I could have over a beer or a cup of coffee or something like that, in which we would take it seriously and talk with forthrightness, but also that would not require some kind of an advanced degree to understand, because we don't need that. What we need is straight and open discussion.
Well, let's hear a little bit of one of those discussions, and this is from the first episode, which is available now.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe some of you already had a chance to listen to it. If not, you should. This is featuring Vic Valchik of the American Civil Liberties Union of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Talking about the issue of police body cams.
Yeah, now this is something I've worked on for years. I was actually working on it before anybody paid the least bit of attention. I wrote the first piece on this in the legal literature back in 2010, and nothing happened, And all of a sudden, there's a lot of interest. Well, I loved this conversation because Vic and I think, both had very nuanced sorts of takes on this. People think of the ACLU as being very doctrinaire, Oh, it must do this, it must not do that. He was much more sophisticated in his outlook, and if you know Vic, it's not a surprise. But here we were 20 minutes or so into the conversation, both of us supporting the use of body cameras. Not a silver bullet for sure, but something that will help. But then you end up in a place like this, and this is the virtue of the format. You can really cover lots of things, and you might end up someplace fully exploring the downsides of something you like. And we were particularly talking about the idea of when do the videos go out to the public, especially in light of right-to-know laws. So let's try it out.
Let's hear it.
One of my great fears with this here in Pennsylvania with our law and in many other states is that you're going to have a public expectation, a strong one, that body camera footage will be available, and that when something goes wrong, the law enforcement people will trot it out and say, well, here's what happened. But under the right-to-know law, the temptation, if not even sometimes the obligation, is going to be very strong to keep the footage out of the public domain. And I think that may undermine whatever benefits we might be getting from this kind of body camera footage in a significant way when the public says, what? You mean we have footage and we can't see it?
Well, and it creates another dynamic. I mean, I'm sure it's not any surprise to listeners to know that there is a There's a lot of tension between police and law enforcement these days, especially when you're talking about police and communities of color. And if you have some kind of publicly visible incident where police did something and somebody gets hurt or somebody gets killed, and then you see the police saying, yeah, we got footage, but we're not going to release it, that's only going to arouse
It's just
more.
going to make it worse.
Right. It
Yeah.
arouses more suspicion, and I think, in fact, will create bigger problems in terms of trying to heal police-community relations. I mean, this really is an area where transparency is needed.
Yes, and if we don't get it, if we get the opposite, we could actually deepen the hole that we're in instead of making things better.
And we're talking about something we both favor. So that's the kind of turn that you get in a good conversation that I think you just, even in the nicest, longest form radio or television story, you just wouldn't get.
And another reason we were excited to do this show is because Pittsburgh has such a wealth of talent and known voices and experts, but we also knew that you would have access to a national network of authorities and experts to bring on. So let's hear from another one of them. Sam Walker
Yes.
is well known for writing about consent decrees. And
Yes,
their
that's
use.
right. Yeah. Those of you who've been around Pittsburgh a while, you know that our police department was the very first in the nation, first large police department to be under a consent decree. This is where the federal government comes in, basically says your police department is broken, it is violating the Constitution, not just once or twice, but in a pattern. And there's a law that allows the federal government to come in. So we did a whole show about these consent decrees, what makes them, what gives the federal government the right to do that, and what happens when they do it. And Sam has studied this more than any other single person in the United States, done some great writing on it, so I was really eager to get him on it now with these consent decrees in Cleveland and Albuquerque, and now in Chicago they're going to face one, and all kinds of other places. So this first clip, a short one, how many have ever heard the expression, it's just a few bad apples? All right. Right? This is used to explain not only police mistakes, I'm not here to pick on the police, but whatever kind of institutional problem there is, these teachers, they're just a few bad apples, we're all really pretty good, Sam has a different take on the idea of a few bad apples. He talks about not a few bad apples, but a rotten barrel of apples. Go for it.
Sam, that bad apples versus bad apple barrel metaphor that I've heard you use, it does seem to me to capture a lot of how you see the world of police misconduct. Can you give our listeners just a little flavor of what you mean by that?
Well, I think it was a new understanding of police misconduct that really began to develop in the 1980s and really crystallized by the 1990s. And it reflected the view that when an officer does something wrong, like use excessive force, that's really the product of bad things in the department. It's bad policies, it's bad training, bad supervision, bad system of accountability. And so if we focus only on that one officer, to try to get some discipline or even get the person fired, so on, we're dealing with the symptom of, and what we really need to do is look at the underlying causes, which are really the bad or inadequate policies of the department as a whole. Another way to view this would be to think of, instead of dealing in retail, one thing at a time, we're talking wholesale. We're looking at the overall, processes of the department, which affect all officers.
I'm going to say this sounds a lot like what I see of what Chief McClay is doing or trying to do in Pittsburgh.
That is exactly right. He wants to take a systemic approach. And that's the whole idea of this consent decree law, which is called the pattern or practice law. You don't look at the individual bad incident. As bad as it is, you have to attend to that, you have to take appropriate action, but it's a symptom of a lot of bad problems. And that's what McClay is doing here. He is looking at officer misconduct. He's looking at the complaint process. He's looking at all these things. So he's actually ahead of the curve. This is another way in which we're very lucky here in Pittsburgh.
And we just reported the other day that complaints are way down, I believe.
What do you know? Look at it as a system and things can change.
So what's the benefit of a format like this for a guest like Sam Walker?
Well, Sam can really explain himself He deals with complicated subject matter. He's very good at explaining himself, but he gets enough air, enough time to fully engage with an issue. And should we talk about the next one? Don't play just yet. Sam had been featured in a documentary that was on not that long ago on Frontline, and there was a companion long-form piece in the Washington Post. It was about consent decrees, so naturally they talked to Sam. And he was, the question for both the documentary and the article was, do consent decrees actually work? I mean, this law has been in existence now a little over 20 years. We've had at least 20 large police departments under consent decrees. Does it solve the problem? It is probably the best tool out there, but how does it actually do? And Sam was widely quoted and so forth. And I had gotten some rumblings from him and from some others in the community of people that he works with, that he was not in agreement with what had appeared. And so what this allowed us to do, he was not in agreement with what had come out in the documentary, gave him, I just opened the door so that he could tell us what he thought of those two very highly placed media sources, the Washington Post and Frontline, PBS, what he thought of their work, what he thought of what they had done, and now you can hear his take on it.
A recent Washington Post Frontline article appeared in November of 2015, and it was titled Forced Reforms, Mixed Results, and it drew a pretty negative picture of consent decrees as a reform device, talked a lot about some of the outcomes that had been less than positive. I'd like to ask you, as a person who's studied this a lot, what are your thoughts about some of the points that they made? I mean, one of the overall point was that I think that consent decrees have come up with what they called mixed results, right in the title of the article. What would be your take on that?
Well, I should say that I was interviewed for that story by the reporter from Frontline, and I was quoted in the story, and I was just horrified when it came out. I was just really appalled. And I will say that among colleagues, there was quite a bit of email traffic among us commenting on how bad this story was. The reporter simply framed the issue in the wrong term.
And how would you have done it?
Well, I would have. What they did was to pick three costs that they indicate that this consent decree process is bad, and the three they selected were just terrible. There's some other material in the story that I would have used, and I would have framed it as, here's one critical view, and here's a positive view, and then framed it as, right, where does the truth lie? Instead, they picked three. The one that was particularly offensive, they cited the dollar cost of the Los Angeles consent decree, which they put at $300 million. And there's some questions about, some accounting issues of are all those costs, should they be assigned to the consent decree? But I think in general, we can say that, yes, reforming a police department is expensive. I always use the analogy of a house. You own a house, you've got some rental property, and over 25 years, you don't fix that place up. Well, at the end of 25 years, you got leaks in the roof.
You're going to have a lot more to pay for, aren't you?
The gutters are bad. The window sills are rotten. There's a leak in the basement. The porch is collapsing.
Right, you just let the whole thing
go. You've got
go.
a huge bill.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a huge bill to bring that up to be able to put it on the market. And so the cost of the consent decree is really paying for all the money that wasn't spent in the past. Now, another aspect of the cost, what is the cost of misconduct? Allowing police misconduct to go on for year after year after year. First of all, there are lawsuits for abuse, and cities are paying out tens of millions of dollars, in some cases tens of millions a year for misconduct. Well, think what that money would buy. If you really reformed the department and they were doing a good job, that money could be used for more police officers, for after-school programs for kids, which would have a good, crime prevention function. And then it's more than just the dollar cost.
That's right. That's right. It causes great damage to the relationship, does it not?
It's the social cost. There's the harm to somebody who gets beaten up by the cops. There's harm to that person's family. You create fear of the police instead of trust in the police. You undermine cooperation with the police. And especially in our African American communities, this is a widely experienced phenomenon, and we have this very bad police community relations situation.
And it's what we're seeing in cities all over the country today.
All over the country, absolutely. And the President's Task Force, their report earlier this year, they really began by saying how the trust between minority communities and the police was broken all around the country.
So paying some attention to some of those kind of costs would have been a much better approach.
You can see the benefit of this format is that somebody can really go to a deep extent, really explain himself, and you get a very full picture. And that was following a very lengthy Washington Post article and a full-hour documentary by Frontline. All right, so you can really supplement other things that you see out there.
And I would add, it's that much more important to be able to take your time with the topic when it's a topic as important and as sensitive as race and its relation to these issues in the criminal justice system that you're looking at. I think maybe my favorite episode is your interview with Melba Pearson. Because it's almost like it almost becomes a science podcast in some way, because it gets into the psychology of perception and the role that race plays in it, and where that becomes part of the justice system.
You're absolutely right, Josh. Melba Pearson, Melba I met at the White House when we were there, both of us, to talk about implicit racial bias. Melba is a prosecutor in the Miami-Dade State's Attorney's Office, and she's also the head of the National Black Prosecutors Association. So she's a very prominent black prosecutor. And so we discussed first, what is implicit bias? How does it work its way into the criminal justice system? And let's face it, these things are difficult, sensitive topics these days. And yet they are front and center, and yet I bet, like me, oftentimes the things that you hear or see in the media don't fully satisfy on these topics. And so having Melba as a guest was a real gift, because she could not only define it and discuss it, she had the perspective of a prosecutor, which you don't normally get. So at this point in our talk, she had talked about it, we had defined it, we had come up with a way to understand it. And I said to her, among your fellow prosecutors, is this something you have seen actually happen? Right? Not knowing how she would take that question, she took it in a surprising direction. I think, just listen to this.
Now, you're in your second decade as a prosecutor, and you've seen a lot of police officers in that time, many prosecutors, and I know that you would probably agree with me that they're, by and large, very good people with strong beliefs about fairness. Even so, in that system, have you seen the application of this kind of implicit racial bias, whether people know it's coming from them or not?
Unfortunately, I have. Many times, people in the system hide under the guise of being jaded. I've just been in this business too long, and I know how it goes, and this person is not going to make it, so why give them a break? They're just going to be back in a week anyway. And sometimes that extends to many actors in the criminal justice system, some who you would not think would have that kind of bias. For instance, defense attorneys. I can recall an incident when I was a new prosecutor where I was in court and I was working on my files, getting ready for the judge to come on the bench and start the day's calendar of cases. And I was talking to a few people and working on my cases, and a defense attorney came up to me and handed me a document and said, "Please file this for me." And I knew in that moment he thought I was the court clerk. Now, keep in mind, the court clerk, wears more casual clothing and sits at a particular desk. That was not where I was sitting. I was wearing a full suit, pearls, the professional attire that a prosecutor wears, and I'm working on the prosecution files. So an experienced defense attorney such as himself should have been more than aware that I was not the clerk. So I politely informed him I was not the clerk and directed him as to where to go, and he got so angry with me. Maybe, yeah, and maybe it was a matter of embarrassment and he was trying to cover it up with, some bravado. But that really struck me and stayed with me, nearly 2 decades later, because that is a perfect example of implicit bias. He probably holds himself out to, well, I'm liberal. I voted for Obama. I voted for Clinton. I'm the last person who could be racist. Most of my clients are black. Nobody's saying you're a racist, but you're making assumptions based on seeing me in court, and you're not assuming that an African-American woman could be
How do you like
prosecutor.
that? And this is not the only one like that.
Yeah, in fact, you just heard from a prosecutor. You're also going to hear from police officers, police officials in this show. Well, without revealing anything, I guess I'll just ask, what was the most surprising thing that you learned in these interviews?
Well, that one was a pretty big surprise in its way. But you mentioned police officers. I've been fortunate to work with, meet, and become friends with a number of really outstanding police officers, both here in Pittsburgh and many other places. One person always stands out to me. This is Captain Chip Huth, who is at the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. This is a gentleman who has had every tough guy position within his police department you could think about, including leading the SWAT team, the raid team. I mean, you name it, he's done it. But he has somehow come out on the other side of this, and along with a partner formerly in that police department, has written a book, the title of which begins, Unleashing the Power of Unconditional Respect. All right? Now, I'm not going to tell you what he has to say about that, because I want you to listen. It is a fascinating way of looking at the world. But I asked him, what was your journey like? How did you get how did you become a police officer, and how did you get to where you are now? Because you couldn't have started where you were. And let's just hear him talk. I mean, I think that you'll see what I mean.
Yeah, well, when I started, first off, a little background on why I wanted to be a cop. And my dad was an abusive man, and we traveled around the country quite a bit as I was growing up, mostly him running from the law. And he liked to put a lot of marks on me and my mom and my brothers and sisters. And so I remember as a young kid that when on the rare occasions when the police would be called and they would come to our home or wherever we happened to be at the time, I remember that feeling of safety, that feeling that everything was going to be okay, that me and my brothers and sister had when the police were there. And that inspired me from a very early age to want to be that type of person that provided that feeling to other people. Consequently, as a side note, all of my family's in law enforcement. I have 9 members of my family on the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. This has all happened through this course of just being inspired and when we were young, to want to help others. And when I came on as a young officer, I kind of most of what I knew about law enforcement was steeped in allegory. I'd read books about cops and I'd seen TV shows and movies about cops, and I kind of thought our primary job is to catch the bad guys. And I kind of envisioned sure, we would talk to people sometimes and engage in conversations, but at the end of the day, I kind of saw myself as someone you would put into a glass case with a sign that said "break glass only in case of extreme emergency."
You were the alarm to go off and go in and fix the problem.
That's it, and that's kind of how I envisioned my job. And so as a consequence of that, David, I just began to see the people that we served in the community in ways that just weren't helpful. Like I thought, well, look, if you're pointing the direction I need to go to catch the bad guy, then you're helpful to me. You know, you're somebody I can use to get what I want. If you're disagreeing with me in any way, then you're just an obstacle in my path. And you know what we do to obstacles? You know, we run over them. You know, we go around them. You know, whatever we need to do. And then, and finally, and probably worst of all, the people that were obeying the law, I just saw them as being irrelevant. Like, you know, that they created absolutely, or they captivated absolutely none of my attention. Like the idea was they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. I just blew right by them and didn't notice them. And you know, I remember that relationship building and interpersonal communication skills, those things just did not seem necessary to me. I thought, look, we've got our fingers in all these holes in a dike, and we're trying to hold back this rush of evil, as I saw it, and we just don't have time. You know, we just don't have time to engage in conversations with folks. It's on from one emergency to the next, and kind of that 911 hamster wheel.
Not helpful, not relevant, not what you need.
Not what I need. I thought, you know, the 911 hamster wheel. I got on that thing and I ran and ran and ran, and that's just kind of the way that I saw things. And you know, over the years, some really thoughtful people that I worked with kind of started questioning the way we were doing things. You know, they kind of, you know, and I remember very vividly on a project that we were working with the SWAT team when I was a younger SWAT officer. We were doing a zero tolerance enforcement strategy in an effort to rid a certain neighborhood of all crime. Anybody that got caught up in the net was ticketed and arrested for whatever the violation might be, no matter how minor. We saw that as being the way to, you know, to establish order. Now, of course, we were catching all kinds of potential partners up in this net. You know, it wasn't just the people who probably needed to go to jail. It was also the people who were on their way to work with maybe an expired license plate or something. And we were creating a lot of resentment. And I remember having a young officer come to me and go, hey, Chip, you realize what we're doing isn't working, right? To which I replied, of course I realize it's not working, but we're the police. That's just what we do.
What a moment.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And so my journey, David, has been one of being kind of pulled along and encouraged and strengthened by others much, much more courageous than I. And, you know, I've benefited from their experience and benefited from their kind hearts. I mean, you know, they really were doing this job for the right reasons. They really wanted to serve and protect in the purest of senses.
That is why I love doing this. I mean, the things people would tell you. That was such a surprising kind of turn. And I knew a little about his background, but boy, it really helped me understand why he got to where he did. And I mean, he didn't have to tell me he was from an abusive family. I was just so moved by that. It was great. It was just great. I really enjoyed talking to him.
It's a great personal story that makes for really compelling listening, and it's also a good example of a way in which this show is not technical. It's not a lecture.
Right.
He goes on to teach us quite a bit about his approach to unconditional respect and the results that it's gotten. So you do learn a lot, but you get there through this man's point of view, and you kind of come along with him. Which actually leads into the last clip that I think we'll play tonight.
All right.
Which is, I think this is what we would call in the business a kicker segment. This would be the lighthearted, fun element that you would go out on.
Right.
Some of these episodes are pretty heavy, but you end them with the segment called Lawyers Behaving Badly.
Now, I don't know how many of you share my enthusiasm, but I grew up reading the alternative press here in Pittsburgh, the city paper. I grew up in Chicago. I read the Chicago Reader. Everywhere I've gone, there's been a paper like that. And these papers always carried a feature that I really liked called News of the Weird. Right? It was always these little capsule stories of some idiot doing just the most spectacularly dumb but funny things that you would go, oh my God. And I thought to myself, you know, I know a lot of stories about lawyers like that. So I started collecting them at some point, and I thought, this is my opportunity. So every episode of the podcast, we're going to end with lawyers behaving badly.
As we wind it up here, as we do in every episode, we got a story for you about lawyers behaving badly. This edition of Lawyers Behaving Badly comes from the ABA Journal, the Legal Profession blog, and some other sources. Now, don't you think lawyers get a bad rap? I mean, too many people think of lawyers, they think uncaring, mercenary, just concerned about themselves and their fees, and most of all, unconcerned with their clients as people. Well, here's a story about a lawyer who went the extra mile. Louisiana lawyer Douglas Kent Hall, representing the ex-wife in a divorce case and custody case. Lawyer Hall got word that the next day his client's ex-husband would be filing an emergency child custody petition, alleging that Hall's client, the ex-wife, was using drugs. Lawyer Hall was not one to sit idly by. He decided he simply had to do something to defend the interest of his client in this very dire situation. So off he went with his client and went to the store, and he did what any self-respecting, caring, deeply human lawyer would do. He bought his client a product called Zydot Ultra Clean Shampoo. Ultra Clean is known as a hair stripper. According to the package, the product, and I'm quoting here, it removes medication, chemical buildup, and other impurities from within the hair shaft. Now, I'm sure it also leaves the hair silky, smooth, and soft as well. Well, in the proceeding the next day with the judge, on the custody petition, Hall, and I'm quoting again, he adamantly denied his client was using drugs. The court ordered Hall's client screened immediately for drugs, and a test of her hair showed no trace of drugs. However, the screening also included tests of the client's urine and cuticles, both of which confirmed that she was, in fact, using drugs. Lawyer Hall ultimately disbarred for lying to the judge and falsifying evidence, and just a couple of other little things like theft and theft of utility services that were unrelated. The guy just tries to stand up for his poor, beleaguered client, and he gets disbarred for his trouble. Maybe he's disbarred, on the other hand, because he forgot to tell her to clean up her pee and her cuticles. That is lawyers behaving badly, and that's the end for Criminal Injustice Today. I'm David Harris. See you next time.
I have never found any difficulty gathering material for lawyers behaving badly. We have some time for questions. And we have a microphone, so everybody will be able to hear you.
How many episodes have you done?
We have done 8 episodes. All the interviews are completed. Josh is completing the engineering and production of them. And we're very happy with what we got.
I mean, how frequently are they going to be released? Are you going to be doing more?
There will be one released every Tuesday. The first one is up today, Tuesday, and there will be one every Tuesday from now for the next 7 weeks after this one. And will we be doing more? I sure hope so. It depends on how they're received, whether we get the clicks and the listeners and all that. There are, like everything else in the digital world, there are metrics for this, and so we'll be following carefully how we're doing. Josh said that as of this morning, when he went on with Morning Edition, he did a quick check, and our metrics showed there had already been 63 downloads as of 5 a.m., and that accounts for what my kids were doing last night, I think. But we sure hope to do more.
I have a comment rather than a question.
Yes, sir. Here's a microphone.
Okay. Was the police officer about whom you commented that he did not need to tell you about the abuse that he suffered from and how it affected his life? I have to spoil the story. I'm a retired psychiatrist,
Ah,
the best kind.
uh-huh.
And I think he did need to tell you. I think he was looking to tell someone about it. And your approach is just wonderful.
Well, thank you.
I think the reason you get this kind of information is because you make it very clear that anything that somebody says to you is going to be available, but your presence makes it fascinating and important and interesting. I'm really impressed with the attitude that you bring to this situation.
Oh, well, that's awfully nice. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
What are some issues or topics that you didn't get a chance to cover in the 8 episodes that you would have liked to if you could have fit a couple more in?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. You know, this arena, there's so much interest in this. There's such a wide variety of topics. We could, I think, have talked about grand juries. There is just so much mystery around grand juries, and why didn't they charge that police officer? What is a grand jury? And then when I explain a little bit about what it is and how it works, people are horrified. You know, it's like, wow, that sounds like the Spanish Inquisition. I said, yeah, actually, it kind of is. So that's something I think I would have grabbed if we had gone longer into a season. Other things we would have talked, I would have thought about a program on defense services. I don't know how many of you know this. You probably are aware that everybody has a right to counsel for their defense if they're charged with a crime for which they go to jail. But the crisis in defense services in the United States is very deep and quite dire in some places. In Louisiana, you have lawyers, public defender offices who are saying, we won't take any more cases. We can't, because if we do, it'll be malpractice and a violation of rules of ethics. So those are two I would have grabbed, I think. And things go well, we'll do them next time.
I can tell you that a lot of thought went into how do we approach these topics in a way that isn't too dependent on the news cycle, because these
Right.
things change over time. So hopefully you'll hear that. But I got to say, ever since we started working on this, I read things and I hear things in the news and go, that should be an episode, and that will be an episode later.
I hope you'll store them up.
Right, keep it a notebook for you.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Other questions?
You have, I assume, plans to create an archive collection of them. Is that a website or a?
Yeah, they will all live on the website, which is criminalinjusticepodcast.com. And they should all be available indefinitely via iTunes or your podcast downloading app of choice, but we will make sure everything's archived and easy to find on the website. So the first episode is up there and the others will follow.
All right. Today we had a short interview with Paul Guggenheimer on Essential Pittsburgh, talking about the podcast, doing something similar to what Josh and I just did with you. That is also up there. You can hear that if you missed it. You could also hear it at 8 o'clock or 8:30, something like that. What topics would you like to hear covered?
Pastor, you're always talking about the university. You're always talking about the University of Television and Film, and I think it would be rather interesting for you to set straight some of the tropes that are out there in the University of Television and Film.
That's a great idea. One of my students from Evidence this morning, and he's right. We constantly talk about how people watching television and seeing movies get the wrong idea. So one of the things we do in Evidence is we look at film clips pretty frequently, and we say, what if this had happened in a courtroom? Or sometimes it's, Tom Cruise in A Few Good Men. Well, what did he do here? It's an interesting way to learn, but the fact is that there's so much misinformation out there because of what's in the entertainment media generally that that would be a great thing to take on at some point. There's Marion. Right there.
Take this
Have to stand up. Part of the criminal justice system is what results from the criminal justice system, which is the reentry situation, and why Pennsylvania, one of the few states, does not reimburse or pay for ex-offenders who are found to be not guilty and are released because after 34 years or whatever, as the recent one was, we're one of the few states that doesn't do anything. And of all states that gives a great amount of money, 10,000 I believe, is Texas. And Texas actually convicts more people than we do and
Wrongly.
executes, wrongly.
Yes.
Wrongly, and executes people, which we don't. And yet they're reimbursing people who were spent most of their lives in jail for something that they were completely innocent. Is there any chance of talking on that subject?
Oh, yes. Yes, there is. Very interesting comment from Marion. There's criminal justice reform that is actually happening in this country for the first time in a long, long time. We have some of these log jams over sentencing reform and things that are breaking on a bipartisan basis. How often do you hear anything that's bipartisan? Well, this is happening. And one of the things that is so interesting about this, as you see the reform happening in red states first, Texas being in the lead, imagine that, Arkansas, places like that, and Pennsylvania is really lagging behind. So we could do a great show about that. That would be worth doing.
I'd like to see a show about the problem in Pennsylvania with mandatory life sentences with no hope of parole and creating this burgeoning population of geriatric lifers, and also with the mandatory life sentences for first and second degree murders. We've created this huge population of people who aren't yet geriatric, but under the present circumstances are just going to, it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And, there's no hope of parole in Pennsylvania for people who've been given life sentences.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Thank you. That's a very good one, too. Other questions, other suggestions? Happy to have them. Ashid.
We've talked more in like the abstract thinking about justice, and I would like to kind of see more of that kind of conversation. I think a lot of this is based upon the assumption that justice exists in the first place. So maybe if you could take a step back and kind of ask those abstract questions, whether or not it exists, and whether or not, the kind of justice that you're implementing eventually results in the type of society that you're looking for.
That's great. I love this. Set a high bar. That'd be a great one. That'd be a good one. Any other questions, thoughts, or comments? Well, we want to thank you all for coming. I hope you'll stick around a little bit, enjoy the food and the beverages. Again, I want to thank the folks from WESA, Megan and Josh, particularly for believing in the project, and everybody here who's helped out. I've just had a ball doing this, and I hope to be able to do more. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you all, and thank you, Josh, for tonight. Thank you.